want to stick on the topic of this universal logic principle that I've been talking about, where the belief is, if short of a mental illness, every action, every decision we make is deliberate in some way. In that moment, we take that action, we make that decision because we ran some cost-benefit analysis and it came out to say that's the better thing to do towards whatever the objective is. And there is a logic underneath that. It might be a short-sighted logic, it might be an incomplete logic, but it's not an irrational decision for that person in that moment. It's not that they don't know what they wanted to do or they picked opposite of what they wanted to do. They did exactly what they wanted to do in that moment. Based on the information they had and the way they were processing it, they did exactly what they wanted to do. And it's an interesting concept, I think, because it's, in some ways it seems, you can almost look at it through a certain angle and say, well, yeah, that's obvious and that makes sense. But then you look at it through another angle and you're like, I don't think that's true at all. Because it's just, for me at least, it's an interesting way to look at it. It's an interesting way to think about how we function. It's so easy to assume people are just irrational, to assume people are just evil or stupid or whatever it is. And that there's nothing to be gained by understanding the way that they think. But if you believe there's a logic there, there is benefit to be gained. If you can understand their logic and how they function, you can better predict how they might act in the future. You can better understand how you should best engage them. There's so much to be had there if you can trust there's a logic underneath it. And again, it's not always a good logic. Often it's a faulty logic, but it's there. And it's made me think a little bit about what does it mean, right? What's the implication? What can you do to improve upon this? And the first place I think about to try to answer that question is, how does this line up with a concept that I've believed for a while, it's pretty well researched and documented, that the brain, the function of the brain, the part of the brain that actually drives our thinking, and this isn't like the technical biological piece, but from a more of a psychological perspective, there's kind of two components to that part of the brain and how we think. There is the more autopilot, instinct-driven, not very thoughtful, just kind of runs on quick heuristics and just looking to conserve energy and just spit out actions and information and decisions and views. Then there's the other part of the brain that is much more thoughtful, like deeply thoughtful and deliberate, processes things, moves much slower, takes more energy, but is better for kind of deep thought, seemingly. And the idea is that much more than we care to acknowledge or would hope of our thinking and how our beliefs are formed and how we act and make decisions, live in the former, live with that more instinctual, just not think too deeply about it, just go, just act. And that would suggest that we don't have a lot of control over ourselves, right? If you think of our mind as somewhat of a separate entity, we don't have full control over it. It's almost controlling us more, and in ways that we don't even recognize. It could be subconscious. So I think about that. I think about, how does this reconcile? If on the one hand I'm saying we don't have really any control, and then on the other I'm saying everything we do is deliberate, how do those two marry together? Or are they conflicting points? I think they tie together. I think the way in which, I think at the end of the day, there's always a cost benefit that's happening. Where it's happening and how high quality it is what varies. In the thoughtful part of the brain, it's pretty straightforward. We are deeply thoughtful about stuff. We think deeply about a topic. Maybe we're thinking about if we want to move or if we want to marry somebody. You engage that very active part of the brain. You do the deep thinking. You run a cost-benefit analysis, maybe literally, but if not, definitely in your mind you are. And you do the thing you want to do. You move, you sell your house, whatever it is. You marry the person, you do that thing. In the other part of the brain, the one that functions more as an autopilot, which is oftentimes more subconscious, or at least we're not fully aware of it, there's still a cost-benefit analysis happening there. It's still our mind making a decision for us. If we drive and we pull up to a red light, think of it that way, right? We don't even think about it consciously. We just stop. And I would say in that case, our mind does a quick cost benefit, make the quick decision of stopping, and it processes it and said, yeah, you stopped at a red. There's very little to be gained running this red light. there's very much to be lost. There's a very high cost in this if I do and get a ticket or crash or whatever it might be. But if you're in a rush, that cost benefit might change, and and so on and so on. So I think, how do these two things reconcile again, right? So that speaks to it. And I think when you start thinking about what's the answer, so if you believe, we make deliberate decisions, and you would imagine on important things, the problem is our logic is so much more shaky and faulty in that first part of the brain, the one that runs on autopilot. The idea is you don't want that doing the calculation. You want to activate and engage the other part of the brain, the more thoughtful part of the brain, so that you can do the best possible calculation, right? Assuming it's an important topic, it's a complex topic, you want, you're gonna do some math. You're gonna do an equation. You want the, PhD level mathematician part of your brain to be running that calculation to ensure it's got the right inputs and that it's sequencing them properly and it's calculating them properly and it's keeping track of its work and it's spitting out the most accurate, complete output that it can. You don't want like the 8th grade pre-algebra student, which is probably even overstating it, that other part of the brain doing the calculation. You want it to be thorough and complete. So you want to engage that other part of the brain. I think is part of the answer of how you try and solve for this issue. Because if we're picking and everything we do is deliberate, it would suggest there is a degree of control. There's agency that we have in that. Even when it's the autopilot part of the brain, I think that's why I focus so much on questioning, because if not trained to do so, if not forced to do so, I guess I should say, that part of the brain will just go. It will just act. It will do a calculation, and it will tell you a very quick, simple answer, and go do that. And if not forced, if not by force to stop it, you're gonna do that, and you're gonna make a bunch of bad decisions. Not mistakes, because you did what you wanted to do, but in theory, from like an objective truth perspective, at some point, you or somebody else, what have you, is gonna look at that and say, hey, that wasn't good. This isn't leading to the outcome of the objective that you wanted. It seemed like it did, or it would, but it's not. And I mean, you could look at this in a whole host of areas, but politics is probably the most, timely and obvious one. You have an objective, which is, I want America to be a great country, right? I want us to be a great country. I want, us to function the way we're supposed to function, be successful, prosper. I want people to be treated well. That's what I want. So you identify a political party or a particular politician, whatever it might be, and you say, hey, I think that person is in line with this. I want that person to be successful. I want that person to win the election. All very logical, lines up with your objective, and makes sense. But as you get more confident, as you get more dug in, and your beliefs harden and your views harden, and that politician and their views become almost part of your identity, I believe the thinking about it starts to shift more to autopilot. This is pretty easy. This is simple. If that person says it, or if that person believes it, well, then I believe it because I'm aligned, and that person's getting me to my objective, which is making the country a better place, right? So the logic in simple form all still holds. But because it switches to that autopilot, again, your cost-benefit analysis is happening in a much more haphazard, rushed way. It's not being checked as thoroughly. If something changes, you may not recognize it, right? If that particular politician or that person, whatever political party, if they start changing how they're acting, if their views change, if their values change, if whatever it is, it starts to move away from the objective that you had, making the country a better place, will you recognize it? How would you recognize it, right? You've now created this process where you've formed really deep-rooted views and beliefs tied to your ego and your identity about a topic, and you've shifted the way you think about that topic to an autopilot, where it almost just it's a rubber stamp check on every cost-benefit analysis, where it's like, yeah, obviously, whatever they say, yes, that's good. And you never question that confidence. You never question the certainty about what you're doing, because there's no questioning at all. You're just going. That's the most dangerous, arguably one of the most dangerous feedback loops you can be in psychologically, because as you continue to do it, it almost strengthens it more, and you feel stronger and stronger about it. And there's just almost no way to break out of it. And you see people like this who've become, I've talked about it in other videos, good people who truly care about the country, but somehow, whatever it is, they're screaming at people on social media and demanding they see things a certain way. They're willing to hurt other people to get to the goal that they want to get to. And it's just like, what happened here? So the importance, again, of teaching yourself to question. If you can interject into there, if it's just my process. If I have a belief that I think is an important belief, I'm going to check it. I'm going to question it. I'm going to force myself to. I'm not going to allow, even if every time I do this deep, thorough check and it comes back right every time, like, yep, still should be in line with them, it's still worth it to do it again regularly. Because the problem is you won't know if something changed. Right? If there's any reason for which you should start to change your beliefs or question or adjust something, you would never know, seemingly, if you fall into that bad feedback cycle. So you have to force yourself to question. It's the importance that we talk about of why you want to think that way. There's blind spots, there's biases. That's what these things are. It's just fancy names for them, but that's what they develop into, and that's what you're trying to avoid. So if you believe the premise of how our minds work, that there's these two, components, the autopilot and the deep thinking one, and you kind of believe the premise that it's all based on a cost-benefit analysis, well, you have to say, all right, I want the cost-benefit analysis to be good. If it's an important topic, the way I ensure it's good is I make sure the right part of the brain is running that calculation. How do I make sure the right part of the brain is running that calculation? Well, I question. I stop. I forcefully stop myself and question myself. I don't allow myself to be confident and certain, I shouldn't say confident, but certain about anything. I employ external instruments, whether that be other people who I can talk to and they can check me or just whatever it might be. The goal is to make sure that when it matters, you're able to ensure that the deep, thoughtful part of your brain is making the cost-benefit analysis.